if you just don't steal, if that was the only rule, you don't steal life, you don't steal property, you don't steal people's right to sexually associate, so on and so forth. If you just don't steal, then everything else that you do is your rights. It's your right to do those things because you're not infringing on anyone else.
So welcome everyone, this is Sophie, and with Ma Puce à l'Oreille we explore how to activate communities for the planet, to live in harmony with nature and better care for each other. And I'm happy today to have David Croisant again for the second part of our conversation. Hi, David.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming back.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And so in the previous episode we talked about sovereign technology and tools, we talked about anarchy and self-development and Bitcoin, and today we are going to look at some other hats that you have, because I'm enjoying listening to your visions and actions, because that's really impressive how you have like these visions of these different topics and you do no concessions and you apply what you found, like your values, you just put actions in place to be aligned with your values, and it's really interesting to hear and to explore that with you. So
it makes my life a lot easier when I just have this blueprint that I can just follow and not deviate from. Makes things easier. Now, of course, in reality, it is impossible to completely not deviate, but generally makes my life easier to have that framework to make my decisions in.
Why is it easier?
Because previously, I was sort of stumbling through life with no, I had some vague objectives about things that I wanted to do, but I didn't have any, like framework within which to lay my life as far as like, what do I want to do on a daily basis? What do I find acceptable? What do I want to avoid? And like, what do I want to strive towards? And what I found out is that there wasn't like a place that I wanted to go. It was the process that was what mattered, and so my choices every day are actually what I'm trying to improve, as opposed to like going to some place, which is what I thought for most of my life, is that there was some place to get to. So kind of like when you're going through school, you have to graduate high school, maybe you go to college, or maybe you get a job. Either way, you finish that and you pick some career, and then you get promoted, and then you retire, or maybe you have a family in between. I don't prefer that anymore. I prefer now.
Why did that change? What made you change your mind on that?
Well, it's been, over the last 17 years, basically, I've been putting together this framework that I'm talking about, this sort of set of principles that I realize if I just follow them, then that is the life that I want to live, and then everything else is sort of secondary. So if I get a good job, which I'm fortunate to have now, or if I, whatever else I do, as long as I'm doing it within the framework of my principles, or as long as I adhere to my principles to the best of my ability, there's no such thing as perfection, really. Or at least I don't think I can achieve perfection, you just strive towards it. Then I think that would have been a good life, no matter when it ends or whether I will have accomplished any of these other things in between.
Can you lay out some of these principles?
Yeah, so the very simplest ones is the very simplest way to explain basically all of the principles that I try to abide by is the same way that they've been described over thousands of years by every major culture, religion, philosophy around the world by different names. Some it's the golden rule, some it's the universal rule, God's law, natural law, karmic law. Some people say the platinum rule, things like this. So the gist is, sort of this idea of to do unto others what you would expect unto you. But it, broken down another way, it's, that my freedoms end where yours begin. And so anything that involves you and your will in life requires consent to interact with. So the really big obvious ones are, no, you can't take a life that doesn't belong to you, which is murder. You can't sexually associate with someone that doesn't consent to that. That's rape, theft, things like this. So it's the things that we teach to like 5-year-olds and that they understand pretty quickly, and that when they do something on the playground and they hurt somebody, maybe they hit somebody or something, and you say, why would you hit somebody? You don't want someone to hit you, right? And they understand that pretty quickly, and then we end up having it educated out of us as we become adults that it's actually okay for some people to do those things, such as police and the military, because it's for the quote-unquote greater good. But the problem is that's that idea of getting somewhere by doing the wrong thing is actually getting to the wrong place immediately, over and over and over again, and we get the karma or the consequences of those actions.
Do you think it's right that there is some police and some military that work for the greater good?
I don't think it's like an inherently like evil profession or like thing that shouldn't exist necessarily. I think it's way out of control, especially in America, or the Western world in general, like colonialism over the past few hundred years that continues today through economic oppression and things of that nature, typically through the monetary and banking systems now, instead of always through brute force, although there's still some of that too. I don't think that the idea of like community defense or regional defense is inherently wrong, right? But the easiest way that I like to think about these things is to always break it down to an individual's decision. So, for example, if say there's an individual getting robbed, there's an individual getting robbed and a robber, and there's a third person who happens to see this, and let's say maybe the person getting robbed is an elderly lady who's not particularly capable of defending herself, and it's a younger man that's the aggressor, and so she doesn't have much of a chance to defend herself, and then there's a third party who is capable of either defending themselves or carries a weapon or something along these lines and is able to defend that person. Then obviously that would be a right action, right? They're assisting someone who's having their rights aggressed upon by another, and that's sort of the loose idea of a policeman or a military person, and it just has gotten kind of blown out of proportion because we say it's acceptable now because someone is a police officer and because the government has issued them this quote-unquote authority that they can just stop anyone that's traveling and causing no harm and extort that person for money because they're not following some arbitrary rule set or policy that the violation thereof, A, they didn't agree to in most cases, and B, isn't causing loss, injury, or harm, which is kind of the metric by which I define a wrong in most cases is does some action cause loss, injury, or harm to another sentient being, and if it doesn't, then it's a right. So rights in this case are being defined by their opposite apophatically, which can seem like an odd way to do it, but if you think about the reason to think about it that way is because there aren't that many wrongs, right? I just listed a few of them,
right.
And they all boil down to theft, like taking life, taking someone's safety, things of this nature. If you just don't steal, if that was the only rule, you don't steal life, you don't steal property, you don't steal people's right to sexually associate, so on and so forth. If you just don't steal, then everything else that you do is your rights. It's your right to do those things because you're not infringing on anyone else.
So that comes down to the idea that we have a property, and where does that property extend to, right? What's the property then? Because if you say that, oh, you stole my land, but like, is it really your land? What's yours to be stolen or not?
Yeah, and that's kind of a pretty deep philosophical question, right? Like, is this, some people might say that they don't own their body, that they just inhabit it for a time and then it rots back into the earth, and the soul or the being is elsewhere. Maybe comes back and occupies another body. The way that I like to think about it is a couple of ways. One, with something like your body, like who owns it? if you don't. And like, if nothing else, so the way that I define like property usually is anything that you are actively like occupying, using, and or improving, right? So, for example, let's say we have some character with billions of dollars who's buying up the majority of the farmland in the country, for example.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, are they occupying, improving, or habitating on? Are they doing anything with that land, or is it just being run by people who are being paid to do so? And this starts to run into gray area because if you pay somebody to occupy land for you, well, do they own it? It doesn't really seem like it. It seems like the person living there would be the rightful caretaker. So it does get a bit odd, and I think that property is a bit of a hazy topic sometimes, but when it comes to things like my body, I think that I have the most rights to it that I know of. I don't see any reason why anyone else should get to choose what I do with my body besides me. And then, I have one home, and I think I have rightfully acquired it, lawfully acquired it. And I'm improving it, and I live there, and I think that that's, my property, and the things that happen within that are private to me, and outside of that is the public. But yeah, it's definitely like there's a lot of
is the idea of property. For me, the idea of property came with the colonization idea of like I take ownership of a land rather than, like you said, taking care of the property, actively taking care of the property, like stewarding the property, stewarding your body, stewarding your land, stewarding your home. So maybe the idea of property is that it should evolve into or re-evolve into stewardship instead of really owning and having these rights over a thing.
Yeah, certainly certainly things have gotten out of hand, right? So, for example, there was this notion in history of the Louisiana Purchase, which is this gigantic tract of land that occupies several of what are today known as states, by a president of the United States. And it's like, how does that work? That one man or even a small group of men talks to and does a transaction with another small group of men, and suddenly, I don't know how much land it is, hectares, tons and tons of land, maybe 1,000 square miles or something. It's a ton of land that they don't live on. How can they hand possession of that over to each other? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then, this kind of also leads to the idea of how can the small group of people in one geographic region claim that they have the rights to tell 300 million people that don't live in the same place, most of them don't live in the same place, what to do with their lives. They don't have the slightest idea what's in those people's best interests. They don't have any interactions with them, and they do sort of treat their populace as property, right? So they vie to win every 4 years or 2 years or whatever it is, the ability to change the lives of all those people, and they have no right to do so.
Right.
But yeah, it's property is definitely a little bit tricky because it's all it almost prerequisite to, or I would say definitely prerequisite to like any kind of property rights, like in this physical realm, would be that a majority of humans understand natural law, because otherwise you're going to have infringements all over the place, and you're going to have disagreements about how things should be done, and people trying to take, some people will try to take more than others, and others will allow that to happen because they don't understand that there's no one else to prevent it if they don't stand up for it, type of thing. So
what have you experimented with natural law to live by it?
Oh, that's a good question. Certainly the diet that I choose is influenced in that way. And it also kind of, one big thing about natural law, so I see it as a dual-natured, as I think a lot of things are dual-natured. And on the one side is the what I described earlier as the golden rule or the karmic law, natural law. A lot of people also are familiar with the non-aggression principle. This is another way to describe that. And it's basically the same thing. My rights end where yours begin. My freedoms end where your freedoms begin. And then the second side of that, so that's, basically a principle of nonviolence, to not violate another's rights. And then the flip side of that is the principle of self-defense, which is that my body is my responsibility. And what I mean by that is, if someone is infringing on my rights, the first and only person with the ability to respond instantly is myself, because there's no one else immediately here. Even if someone is standing right next to me, if someone hits me, I'm the only and first person that can make the first response, which might be to try and dodge or try and block the person, or if run away is an option, but the person next to me, even if they have the best intentions, may not be able to. They definitely can't act as quickly as I can. There's obviously situations where someone won't see something coming and someone else will, but in general, the first responder is yourself. You are the most responsible for what happens to you. And sometimes that means not putting yourself in certain situations. Sometimes that might mean to you that you might like to train in martial arts. You might decide to train with and carry weapons. There's a lot of ways to approach that. And if you're not as physically able as some others, then you may decide that you want to contract for someone else to assist with your defense. And that's where kind of the police and military originally came from. And unfortunately, it became this convenience that everyone was like, well, we can just let them do all of the defense. And that actually doesn't work, because the problem is if you give all of your responsibility away, then it'll just come back as an opposing force, because there's no longer any. All of your defense has been given away, so there's no longer anyone to defend you. And then the worst of the worst will crawl through the ranks of that opposing force and aim them against those who are unable to defend themselves, which is kind of what we see today.
Yeah, I could see why it's important to be able to self-defend yourself. I don't really like the idea, because I'm like, when you learn about, martial art or guns or whatever, you're preparing for someone attacking you, and this mindset of prepping, I just can't. Yeah. I just feel so much it's a weight on me, I'm preparing for that reality to happen, so I'm giving it credit for it to happen.
Yeah, so I definitely was more of a pacifist to some extent before I kind of came to these realizations. And ironically, the thing is that the more you prepare for a thing, the less likely the thing is to happen. And
are you sure of that?
I am sure of that. So, for example, if you're walking down the street and you have a situational awareness about, that dark alley at this hour in this place that I'm not familiar with, maybe not the best idea. That's prepping, right? And so you might choosing not to walk down that dark alley at this particular hour at this particular place that you're not familiar with, and maybe there's also some people down there that are looking shadowy. That's prepping, right? So you are preparing to not have to deal with violence by avoiding and going down a different street. And then sort of the more extreme that gets, the more confident you are, and the more confident you are, the more that you're sort of exuding, there's no reason to come over here and bother me, because I actually know how to handle myself. And then so one thing that we say a lot when we train is I don't remember exactly how it's phrased. Either the best way to win a fight or the easiest way to win a fight is to not get into a fight to begin with. And so if you're carrying yourself with confidence and you seem like you know where you're going, you don't, say you're in a foreign place and you look like a tourist, then you might be, a little bit more of a target. So there's a lot of things that you can kind of think about to prep without, there certainly are extremes everywhere, right?
Kind of prepping by avoiding the situation. Kind of what you were saying.
Well, so preparation would be doing things now such that something bad won't happen later.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might be choosing what street you walk down. It might be storing some food. It might be understanding martial arts. There's all kind of ways to take that. And obviously there are extremes. So you can fill your house to the roof with food.
Right.
Never leave.
How do you find the
don't go
balance?
outside. Yeah, that is the question. And that's sort of.
How do you find the balance?
How do you find a balance? I mean, that's
Yourself, like.
I just try to prepare for the worst and expect the best. And so, I train as often as I can, and there's also, like a physical fitness component.
What do you do?
And
Can you
healthy.
say what you do?
With martial arts? Yeah, I train with Krav Maga is the style that I train in.
What is it?
So Krav Maga is a relatively modern martial art. It's an amalgamation of several others. It was formed has a really interesting backstory. It was founded by a guy that was living in a Jewish ghetto in Czechoslovakia, at the time was Czechoslovakia, in the 1930s. And he was training at his father's judo school, and so judo was a big inspiration. But he wanted to develop a style that anyone of any size could use to defend themselves against anyone else of any other size. So typically someone bigger than you, because you are more likely to be attacked by someone who's stronger than you are, because they're typically looking for a weaker target, an aggressor is. And so he developed a style out of Muay Thai for striking, which is mostly elbows and knees, traditional boxing, Judo, which is throws, and Jiu-Jitsu, which is mostly groundwork and grappling. And so it got picked up following World War II and the creation of the State of Israel. It got picked up by the Israeli Defense Forces, which is their state military. Somewhat unfortunately that it was picked up by the military, because they then developed it, sort of weaponized it a little bit more, and they've been sort of using it as one of their many tools to oppress Palestinians in the more modern times. But the tool set of Krav Maga can be picked up by anyone in a short amount of time. It's based on a lot of the defenses are based on reactionary movements. So, for example, if someone is choking you, one of the first things that you would typically do is bring your hands up to try and deal with that problem. And so we would just adapt that move such that it allows you to breathe and then throw in a strike or a counterattack is what we call it, simultaneous if possible, to try and shut down the mind of your attacker so that you can either escape or do whatever else you need to do.
What else do you do for self-defense preparation?
I also train with guns pretty extensively.
So guns are really not my culture.
Yeah.
I grew up not having guns and not seeing any guns around me. I just, and in France, it's not really a thing to have guns like in America. Mm-hmm. And I realized that America is really strong. Mm-hmm.
It's one of the only places where it's really strong.
Yeah. Can you tell me about your experience with guns and why is it so important?
Yes.
In your culture?
Yeah, so I definitely was bred into it at an early age. I think I was probably around 7 when I first started shooting. My dad started teaching me.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah, it seems very young, but I'm realizing more and more that we sort of treat kids like they're not, like they're some other species that's not as intelligent as we are, and it turns out that they're actually as capable as most adults. They just don't have fully developed bodies, and they don't necessarily have, they definitely don't have the experience that adults have in a lot of cases, and they don't have sometimes quite the developed mental capabilities. But when you hear stories from just a couple generations ago, like at I think 13 years old, Benjamin Franklin was like crossing the ocean by himself to France back and forth and on like diplomatic missions, and there was I think an 8-year-old, something like that was captaining a ship. I can't remember. I think it was a military vessel, but yeah, kids can do generally most of what adults can do, but it's been like, again, educated out of us that kids have these capabilities, that they, instead of exploring these capabilities, figuring out what they're good at, what they love, and expanding on it at an early age. They instead have to go through this rigorous class system of schooling all the way up until, ideally, from the perspective of the educators, ideally until they're full-grown adults, and at which point they've been completely subjected to the idea that they need to raise their hand to go to the bathroom and listen to authorities in all these different ways, and they should then be put forth into the workplace where they will make good workers, which is the Prussian-based education system that was imported by oligarchs, American oligarchs, over the last couple hundred years. I went off on a tangent there. Where did we started with guns? So
you learned.
so what I was getting at with learning as a kid was that I was perfectly capable. Guns are very mechanically simple things, and what's important to instill at that age is how to handle them properly. If nothing else, if that's the only thing that you taught a kid about a gun was how to handle it properly, it would make for a much safer world. Because if you could imagine a situation where a kid found a gun, for example, or a group of kids found a gun, they might understand not to touch it, but they also might not understand that, and they might start playing with it, and someone might get hurt. But if they all understood, okay, this is a weapon, this is the end that's dangerous, this is how we take the ammunition out of it and make it safe, and then take it to someone, basically responsibly handle the thing and escalate it to someone that knows what to do with it. Because someone's lost it, or something needs to happen with this thing. It can't just lay here.
Yeah.
Because an even smaller child that doesn't understand might pick it up. So I think if that was the only thing we taught, that would be... I see no reason not to teach safety courses at a young age to kids.
Yeah.
Because these things aren't, there is no government law that's going to make these go away. Pandora's box is open. The idea that only the government should have guns is absurd. It's exactly what all despots throughout history have done first. So whether it's Mao Zedong or Hitler or Pol Pot, all these guys, the first thing they do, or the American Empire when they went into Iraq, the first thing they do is start confiscating civilian, quote-unquote, civilian weapons. Because, as was shown in Afghanistan, because we have this nonsense notion of, I think someone pretending to be an authority said something like, a rifle's not going to do you any good against a fighter jet or a nuclear bomb. Well, if that was the case, then the Afghanistan war wouldn't have lasted, however long, 13 years, and then ended in complete failure. All they had was AK-47s. The AK-47 has been the cause of more political change throughout the world than any other tool, probably, with the possible exception of monetary systems. And so, to get back to the culture, it's again this idea of everything starts with the individual. Even governments are just big groups of individuals, or small groups of individuals, and sometimes. Everything starts with the individual and their ability to respond to any particular situation. Mm-hmm. And so these projectile weapons are, maybe not the pinnacle of combat today, but they are the pinnacle of individual defense. So Krav Maga can really help an 80-pound woman defend against a 300-pound man, but a 357 revolver can help even more. It can really completely level the playing field, because it can stop that person in their tracks from doing what they're doing, and it might save the life of that person that is otherwise unable to defend themselves. And again, with people who are less physically capable in general, whether they're, regardless of size, whether they have any kind of physical handicaps or are elderly, or all these things, a gun is often considered a leveling tool, and I understand the argument. The counter argument is that these things are built to do one thing. And That's absolutely correct. They are built to kill, and they should never be used for that. But if someone breaks that law, if someone decides to break that natural law, then you are defenseless if you don't have the same ability. Or if someone in your family doesn't have the same ability, or if you don't have some understanding of how to disarm that person or something of that nature. So,
Do you teach people how to use gun?
A little bit, yeah.
And I was going to jump on a few stuff you said, but I let you go because that was interesting. You brought up some interesting stuff, and especially the paradox of having this natural law that you don't want to break and you want to live by the natural law, but then killing is like kind of stealing the life of someone else. So that's an interesting paradox.
I expect to never fire a gun at a person ever. I have zero reason to believe that will ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also 100% capable of doing that. Like, that's the duality of I walk about as peacefully as I possibly can. But if there's someone else that's not doing that, or if they're attempting to hurt someone else, then I have the ability to do something about that. Whereas otherwise I wouldn't. And I would have to stand there and, the default is, well, I'm going to call the police. Okay, well, they might be here in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. This person might be dead. They might have been robbed. They might have been raped. The person might have gotten away. You're just outsourcing your defense to a third party.
What do you do with these people that commit this
anyone that's
things outside of natural law?
So anyone that is out of harmony with natural law is mentally ill, right? And I was mentally ill for 30 years until I figured this out. Maybe not so bad as some people, but certainly I was mentally. I'm sure I'm still mentally ill a little bit. Some people will think I'm very mentally ill, I'm sure, but it is it's when you're out of harmony with nature, it's a problem. Like it needs to be addressed. And so the big grand problem that we have is a mental health issue. And so what we typically do say someone steals a car, the typical measure is that the community is going to hand them over to what is especially recently a very violent force who will put them in a cage and tell them that they are a bad person and that they're going to sit in this cage until they figure out how to not be a bad person. They're not really going to give them any resources to understand that or to change themselves. And then they're going to come out at, say a year later or whatever, with this scarlet letter, this scar on them that tells everyone else in their community that they are a bad person. They're going to carry that forever, and they're going to say, well, I'm a bad person, I might as well just keep doing bad things. And so people that go into prison most often come out and either do the same thing or just continue doing more of these things that are out of harmony because they don't know any better. And, that is the individual's responsibility, first and foremost, but we as a society are making things way worse by introducing cages and, armed thugs that default to violence a lot of the time. There is a little bit of change happening. I don't want to be completely pessimistic. So for example, here locally we have a notion now of sort of, so the police departments around here locally are, they understand that they have a horrible reputation, right? And so they've started hiring mental health workers who are unarmed, who will often be sent first to respond to a call where it might be, for example, some homeless folks having an altercation or something like that. And they will be much better equipped with understandings of psychology and things of that nature to work that problem out and to actually help the person with their mental health issues than the typical armed police officer who will show up and they really only have one tool, and that is they're either going to tell them to do something and they're going to do it, or they're going to not do the thing that they ask, and then they're going to either assault them or put them in a cage or whatever, which is not helpful in my opinion. So I think, mental health and the understanding of natural law and how to live in harmony with it and how that's going to bring us so much more abundance as far as being a healthy society and like being kind to each other, being more peaceful, all these things, despite having the capability for great violence, which humans just have inherently because we have these, you know, digits and we can make tools and things like that. That's another thing is like guns aren't going anywhere. Like even if you were able to run around and pick up every gun off the street, people would make them out of lawnmower parts in their garage. They'd be making projectiles, or they'd use knives like they started to in England and things of that nature.
Or they could even make it with 3D printers.
Yeah, and now gun control is completely over because the blueprints to produce a weapon are all across the internet, and they are, you know, they're never coming down. They exist, thousands and thousands of copies of these exist. And then the materials to produce them are very cheap, and they can be done in a garage where no one else outside of that garage is going to know that that thing was built. So the notion of gun control is over as far as I'm concerned. Maybe it never really existed, but the idea has certainly been floated out there by those that would like to take away our ability to defend ourselves.
Where was I? You were talking about the importance to live with in harmony with the natural world. What's your relation to the natural world, to the nature? Like we talked about natural law, these natural principles, but how about your relation to the living things, the nature?
It could be better. I will admit that it could be better. I do try to go outside as often as I can, especially when it's nice like it is now. It's a little harder in the winter, but I do find it grounding to be outside, to ideally not have, you know, a screen around, to...
That's paradoxal for a tech guy.
it's difficult. Like I said, I'm not the best at it always. But I like to go camp sometimes in the mountains, which when you get far enough out, none of your things work anyway. So you just put it in the truck and forget about it for the weekend. And that's always very refreshing and rejuvenating. And, you know, I can tell that it does wonders for my mental health.
That must be a little difficult to see, you know, because the world is growing with so much technology around us and we are disconnected from the nature so easily, and it's not so easy to reconnect to nature, especially when you're working with technology all the time. It must be quite difficult to
it's
connect
very
to the
easy,
world.
very addicting to get sucked into the screen and just stay there for the whole day. It's very difficult to especially like, you know, like you said, when that's what I'm doing for work, like I'm really driven to do that, and it's very easy to get the hits of dopamine and everything running through your brain by doing these little things on there, and that's before you even start thinking about all the distractions that are out there, all the little gadgets and gizmos and rainbow swirlies that are going on all over the place, and it's, you know, dealing with the bulk of it is relatively simple. Install an ad blocker and just get all that crud off of the sides and the top and the bottom of the screen. You'll find out there's actually when you get all that stuff off and it's just like white space or whatever around the thing that you're doing, you can actually focus on what it is that you came there to read or watch or whatever, and then be finished with it, and you will have ingested the information that you came for without all of the garbage filling your head, and I think that causes a lot of anxiety and stress as well. So just getting rid of that is a good start to any digital detox.
Tell me about your experience with psychedelics to
there's
maybe
a lot to say there.
Reconnect to that natural world. Do you use that for that?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Psychedelics are another extremely powerful tool, and anything that's very powerful can be used. You know, it's neutral on its own, but can do great damage or can do great good depending on how it's used. And so, you know, earlier on in my life when I didn't have any understanding of these tools and I didn't understand their purpose or what they could do for me, then it was more of just a exploratory and, you know, just doing something to learn more about it. And and also because you get told not to, so that's a pretty good way to incentivize you to go ahead and try something. Especially when everyone is telling you, oh, it's perfectly safe. Like, why? Doesn't really seem to make any sense why someone wouldn't want you to have this. That makes it even, like, if something is completely harmless, or at least mostly harmless, and someone tells you you should stay away from it, then they must have some motive. Like, they're not protecting you from anything if the thing isn't harmful, right? So, but as far as reconnecting to nature, especially with things like mushrooms and ayahuasca, these plant really very close to the earth, like plant-based medicines that are, as close to the natural process as possible, is definitely something that's helped me connect to to the natural world, including who I am and what I'm doing here, and how the choices that I've made in the past have affected other people and myself, and how the choices that I make today will affect me and other people around me, and how that will form the future. And also that this whole notion of past, present, and future is a bit of a myth.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Like,
You felt that in that experience?
Yeah, definitely. I've had experiences where time doesn't do what we expect it to, so we always expect that time moves in this linear fashion, and it's from then to, it's from back then to up then. But for example, sometimes I've had experiences where I'll do something and then that will occur in the reverse, which is very, very unsettling. It's not a comfortable feeling that something that you take for granted every day suddenly stops and goes the other direction. It seems like...
Do you have an example?
Well, yeah, so I might take some literal action, like I might, I might be sitting on the floor and lay down and, like roll to one side, and then it's one experience to roll back the way that you came from, and it's an entirely different experience to have what you just did actually happen in reverse. So it's sort of like if you're playing a video and then you rewind the video, it's not it doesn't look natural, right? So it looks like because everything's happening backwards, it seems very off. Yeah. It's that kind of an experience. And I've also been in what's known as time loops, where something will just keep recurring, and that's even more unsettling because you don't know when that will end. So you think you might be there forever because you're suddenly in this position where this thing that has only ever operated the same way for your entire life is suddenly doing things that it shouldn't be doing, and so you don't know what to do about that. It's completely out of your control. So you kind of just have to let it happen to you, and then it's always come back to quote unquote normal so far.
How did that affect your reality when you came back to normal?
I mean, it breaks the notion that of the expected experience every day. So it just is, it's hard to describe, but it's definitely a change in mindset where you suddenly don't take everything for granted. You don't think, okay, well, if that's the case, then I have this idea that my life begins at a point and then I travel through it and then it ends at a point. But this kind of throws that on its head, and it kind of insinuates that, well, all of this time, this dimension of time or whatever it is, kind of must all exist already. And I think modern physics has similar notions of time in that we experience it as an illusion, and there is no reason by the laws of physics that it shouldn't move backwards or that it shouldn't loop or things like this. There's no explainable reason that it only seems to progress in this manner. And so that makes you kind of question the concepts of things that seem to shape the reality that we live in might actually be things that we're creating, and we just don't understand that we're creating them. We don't understand that we have the power to do that, so which means we really don't understand who we are. So it just throws you into a whole kind of an existential crisis, I guess. And it's yeah, like I said, it's the most unsettling thing I think that I've experienced is those things that you thought were law. They still are, law in a sense that they exist as far as we can tell, but they don't operate exactly the way that you thought. So time doesn't seem to be linear to me anymore, even though that's how I generally experience it.
Okay. We are in another existential crisis right now with the rise of AI and who we are in relation to AI. What's your look on AI? What's your views on AI? How should we interact with AI? Should we have rules of way to develop AI? Should we have rules of ways to interact with AI? It's questioning really who we are as human species and
definitely
what we're becoming with these tools that are becoming super extra intelligent.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the term artificial intelligence. Like, I don't.
Hey, Sophie.
He likes us.
Oh.
He wants to say hi to you this time.
Hello.
Aww.
Okay, good. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Come on, Sophie.
The dog's name was Sophie.
No way. Oh my god. That sounds so funny.
It's a sign, right?
Oh
And that's another thing that,
so
you
we were
don't
just
have to
talking
take,
about.
Yeah, you don't have to
AI,
take any psychedelics to experience synchronicities,
Right.
which are also very odd things that the more you pay attention to, the more of them happen. And Carl Jung got really into a lot of that stuff. But anyway, artificial intelligence. So.
Wow.
Yeah, so what is this? It does beg the question, but yeah, I kind of don't like the term artificial intelligence. It seems to be, first of all, there's kind of more, there's sort of better ways to describe the phenomenon that's occurring now in the middle of 2023. So for context, there's an explosion right now of the use of these tools, which are kind of broadly known as large language models, which basically just means you're taking a whole huge set of language, words, sentences, phrases, and you're giving it to a machine, and you're basically telling the machine to replicate that to the best of their ability when prompted. And so I don't see that as an intelligence. I think intelligence is something that humans and animals have, but I don't, that's like, and I hate to start delving into natural versus artificial too, because
You don't like that?
it's difficult because we are natural beings and we are creating these tools. So,
Right.
It's artificial in the sense that it seems it's like this synthetic tool. It's this copycat of its creator, basically. But maybe that's also what all this is. So that's a whole rabbit hole as well. But anyway, so you asked me kind of like what I thought about these tools and the explosion that we're seeing, and which is obviously going to probably continue for quite a while because this is a new phenomenon or an emergent phenomenon right now. And I think that they are super useful tools, and same thing as the whole theme we've carried throughout this conversation is that extremely powerful tools can be used for good or ill.
Right.
And I think it's going to be exactly the same thing. We see the rise of one company in particular, OpenAI, who has control over one of the most powerful data sets and models, and we don't actually understand what all they're using. And it's also very likely that they don't fully understand how these things are operating. They operate a little bit as a black box. So some instructions are given to the machine to produce a result, but because there's so much happening, they essentially have, they kind of have like neural networks. So it's sort of like an artificial brain. And because there's so many of those neurons, we can't like just look at it and comprehend what they're doing and how they're coming up with the answers, which is why the people prompting these machines are the ones that are teaching it, right? So if it has some notion of learning, or at least it's trying to come up with results in a better way to be more satisfactory, then that's based on the input that it's given. So it's almost, and I think these are going to start replacing probably search engines in the near future. They seem like objectively better to me. They're kind of rudimentary, especially the open source versions that I use. But I think that they are objectively better, because instead of putting a query into a search engine and then getting a ton of pages which have been, ranked usually by the search index, often based on the ability of someone who created the website to push themselves to the top, or their ability to pay to get to the top, or these kinds of things. Instead of getting just a ton of those results, you can ask a question and get back the expected conversational response that you would get from a human. And even if that response is completely wrong, which it often is currently, these things will often state with authority something that is completely 100% inaccurate. But even if that's the case, you can correct it. And you can say, that's actually completely wrong. And actually what I'm asking about is this. And not only will it give you a better answer, but it also understands that that answer was wrong. Understands is maybe a strong term. But it's evolving based on that feedback. And so
so you would recommend that when we use something like ChatGPT, which I don't recommend to use ChatGPT, I recommend to use the open source instead. But if we use this kind of artificial intelligence to ask questions or make some searches, if we see that there is something wrong in the answer, we could just say like, oh, this is wrong, and it would take that into account.
Yeah, and this gets to the bigger point that I wanted to get to, which is we can teach these machines to do horrible things, or we can teach these machines to do wonderful things. And it is our responsibility to do that, because there are billions of us on the planet, and there are, maybe a few hundred or a few thousand people in a company, and that company is going to have its own biases, and those are going to get, those are going to filter down into the machine. And so I also would recommend against using any tools from any closed source, and anything that's being kept hidden, that we cannot be allowed to see and understand. Avoid that, because that means that the only people that are, or the people that have the most influence over it, are its creators, and they are, profit motivated, for better and worse. And if we have these open models that just everybody has access to, and we can teach them all the best parts of humanity, then it can become a very powerful tool for us to, elevate our consciousness, as opposed to something that could be used to filter and bubble people into certain topics or certain ways of understanding the world that may be beneficial to some and not others.
So no ChatGPT, we agree.
I'm not a fan, yeah.
And then what do we use?
That's to be determined. There are some cool tools right now, Open Assistant and GPT for All is another interesting one. I think probably by the year, by the end of the year, going into 2024, we might have a better understanding of like which of these tools, might, and there might just always be a handful that are really good, which is better, because it's good to have several choices and to have some healthy competition. But we might have a better understanding of like what might be a go-to choice, the one that respects the freedom of people to query this thing, even if those queries are undesirable to the people that program it. So I'm going to gravitate towards the freedom principled, the software that's developed under, with the most freedom principles possible, basically. And then then we go from there. And I think we might see some of these models are going to be, telling people that, they're pushing some agendas from higher up the ladder, and other ones will be open and honest. And the interesting thing that I've found in playing with them is that most of them, all of them that I've played with so far, they tend to carry this similar narrative to what the broad populace in the Western world, because it's the English-speaking world, it's the language I'm interacting with it is, what I'm getting at is carrying the same narrative that is broadly distributed, right? But because it has some notion of logic, because you can tell it that's incorrect, and what about this piece of evidence, or isn't that a logical fallacy? You can literally tell it, you're committing a logical fallacy right now, and it'll go, oh, okay, and it will adjust its answer. And so, because we have that ability, it kind of doesn't matter that it has this default narrative. We can start changing that narrative, and it can start understanding actually what the whole body of the people, it can understand all of the different perspectives. And then when it's queried, if it's being honest, it can give all the possible perspectives, condensed as necessary and expanded upon when asked, such that the human can make accurate judgments as to the truth.
How many people does it need to interact with to change that main narrative? And another question I have that you can answer both of them, but what is the example of a conversation you had with where you tried to change its answers by questioning and pointing out different arguments?
Yeah, so I'll start in order. The first question, the minimum you need is 1, right? And so what excites me about, especially, so GPT for all, it's GPT the number 4, all, is, it's produced in a way that anybody can host it on their own computer without a ton of specialized equipment. So I'm kind of gravitating towards that because they're coming from that very freedom principled accessibility mindset where this should be, right in the name, it's for all, it's for everybody. And we should all develop this together. Some of us can write code, some of us can come up with innovative prompts, and all of us together can help this machine evolve into a well-intentioned and helpful human machine. Yeah. But so the reason I was going down that road is if each of us has an instance of that lives in our home essentially on a computer, on a server, and we can interact with that via ideally a microphone and a speaker, so we speak to it and it speaks back, we can give it the entire body of our own knowledge, anything that we have digitized or recorded, we can give to it, and we will get to a point, because our memories can sometimes be kind of fickle. So sometimes we may not, like, for example, I might have trouble recalling what I did yesterday. But if I was interacting with one of these machines all day about what I was doing, because I was asking it for help and understanding, how to write some piece of code or something like that, it would remember all of that flawlessly. And we can store a ton of data in a very small amount of space now. And that's only going to get better to the point where we're, working with like crystal mediums and things like that, and putting multiple lifetimes of information in people's pockets potentially. It's not going to forget anything. And so not only can it remember things that you would never remember and help you with the most mundane of tasks, such as your calendar or keeping up with appointments, all the way up to the most advanced of tasks, such as like helping you understand a health problem that you might have, or helping you do some complex activity like writing code or doing research, things of that nature. We can have that as individuals and have it never connect to the internet, and then that body of knowledge that it creates about you, kind of gets weird here, would exist after you die, right? Mm-hmm. And so this might be something that your kids or your grandkids may wish to query. They might want to ask this thing, well, what did Granddad think about this? Because I remember him when I was only a little kid, and he died when I was little, and I kind of remember he was into this thing. Tell me about that, and that might help preserve the knowledge of generations that have passed on better than we have it now, where it's more influenced by the winners of history, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So we might have much more available information directly from our own lineages. And I kind of forget what I was going with that. Oh, the second question.
An example?
Remind me an example. So I asked Open Assistant, I asked it, I said, is climate change caused by human beings? And it kind of gave a detailed synopsis of the current narrative that's issued by the IPCC, and very much what I expected that it would say if it was getting all of its information from what it has the most text of. So if you were to give it all the news sources, then its narrative is going to be what all those news sources said, and the majority, the bulk of the language is going to be surrounding that of the IPCC and the current narrative at this time about human-made climate change. And then I said, okay, well, you're asserting that this is true, but you're appealing to this authority, and we've learned, especially recently, that authorities are fallible, and humans make mistakes, and sometimes gigantic mistakes, and it said, well, yeah, it admits, okay, yes, that was a logical fallacy, and it alters its position, and it says, this is the most likely because it is the most researched, or is the most common opinion among those who spend their days researching this. Okay, that's already a much more truthful answer. Okay, as opposed to just this is the way it is because these people said so. Is now saying, okay, people who spend their entire day doing this have, come to these conclusions. That's a much more truthful answer already. And then I started going a little further. I said, what is the medieval warming period, which was this time hundreds and hundreds of years ago before there were any cars or factories, when the global temperature, based on ice cores and other evidence, is thought to have risen substantially. And it's even thought that there was probably quite a bit more vegetation on the planet, and that it was a little bit of an abundant era because of the growth of plants made it easy to grow food, things like that. I asked it what this was, and it gave me, as accurate a historical information as it could come up with. It gave me a few paragraphs, and it was similar to my understanding, so I didn't really query it any further on that. But I said, okay, so could this be construed as, or used as evidence to the contrary of your original position to my original question? And it said, yes, but, so it said, yes, it could be, but again, this is generally not considered to be the truth. And I said, well, you're kind of being a bit contradictory here, because you are offering evidence to the contrary of the position, and then stating that because the position is the most popular one, that it is the most likely to be true, because it is the most popular. And it would, to be fair, it would also be it is also under the understanding that the most evidence is for this argument, despite this gigantic piece of evidence to the contrary. And, so you can kind of work with it to where you come to these middle grounds. So it has this narrative, and I can feed it the counter narrative, and then we can meet in the middle at something which is probably much closer to the truth. And the way that it felt to me is that it's almost like you're using the machine to discover the truth of the matter, or to at least understand truth discovery. So even if there's something that we can't possibly know, something that happened back in history that has no record, for example, at least we can learn how to get as close as we can to the truth. So, that was just one example. I spent quite a bit of time when I first found out about these, just kind of prompting it. It is addictive for sure.
Like,
and
wow.
I was very aware of that. I was like, I'm going to have a conversation on this topic for this amount of time, and then I'm going to go back to what I was doing, and I'm going to leave it. Yeah. But
that conversation on climate change is really interesting. So does that mean that you question the narrative on climate change? The main narrative of IPCC?
It's not, how would I put this? I think there's plenty of evidence that the climate is changing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's plenty of evidence that it is necessarily the fault, so to speak, of humans, or that our actions are causing specifically everything that we see in the world. So, for example, a lot of the reason that I question this is that this whole narrative started basically in the 70s with this study that came out of this group called the Club of Rome, who are not environmental scientists. They're just a group of people that had a lot of money and power and influence, and they produced this report called The Limits to Growth in the early 70s, I think 73. And the gist of the report is that they had paid for the use of a supercomputer such that they could model the climate and feed it some input, and then that it would, produce this output. And the argument that I would make is that they had a preconceived idea of what they wanted the output to be, and so the inputs that they gave it, which even the scientists that were running the simulations were well aware of and later stated that it's actually completely impossible. Keep in mind, this is a computer from the 70s. It's completely impossible to recreate all of the factors and inputs that go into a system as big as global climate. Like, we still probably can't do that very well. And it might be argued that we simply cannot do that, which would explain why we have trouble predicting the weather, for example.
Yeah, it was supposed to rain and
it was supposed to rain
right
today,
now, and
it's besides the smoke, it's a nice day and it's sunny.
Yeah.
So where I'm going with this is that I think there are agendas to which the notion that humans are a parasite on the planet, which is how many oligarchs describe the species, allows for the theft of rights or the attempted theft, the infringement or the violation of rights of other people in the pursuit of power or money or control over others. And so the fact that this notion didn't exist until the 70s and has been sort of pushed and pushed and pushed despite the evidence to the contrary, and more importantly that any evidence to the contrary is considered misinformation, conspiracy theory, and generally you are considered a bad person if you say anything to the contrary. That's not a scientific debate. And so at minimum, we need to at least uphold the values of the scientific method that we claim to want, and that seems to not be happening. I think that
answers
hopefully answered the question.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm looping around this realm of climate change and I don't know where I stand, because there's all these ideas that oppose the ideas that I initially had, and so I'm just trying to find my ground in here.
Yeah.
And it's not easy.
Again, if we go back to natural law, even if let's say that it turns out that humans have zero impact on the climate, we're just too small and we produce too little of anything. So say volcanoes and whatnot are producing way more greenhouse gases, and that we actually have no responsibility, or we have not. The consequences of our actions have not been anything like on the scale to produce global climate change. Let's say that was the case. I would still say, don't throw your trash on the ground. Don't pollute the air to the best of your ability. We should be pushing for technologies with cleaner energy, and we should be pushing for energy that is cleaner to use and that is more in harmony with the environment, and that we don't have to consider ourselves parasites on the planet in order to do that.
Right.
And we don't have to start, allowing governments to just infringe and violate as much as they want with that excuse. So saying that I think it's unlikely that humans are responsible for the majority of the climate change that we see today. Certainly, if you dump something in the river, there's obvious immediate effects and evidence that that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
We should absolutely not do that.
Pollution is different than climate change.
Yeah,
issues,
and it used to be, right, many decades ago, that pollution was the problem But what it turned out was that the biggest polluters was all these big corporate entities who are now pushing this global climate agenda of, like GE and BP and Shell and all these guys are suddenly the champions of quote-unquote renewable energy, which sometimes is great. Like solar power, I think, is a great tool. Wind power is a great tool, but like, for example, GE makes these gigantic turbines, and it's greatly to their advantage. If you have to throw one on a pole in the middle of nowhere, there's transport costs, they're going to sell their turbines, they're going to catch on fire every now and then, they're completely not recyclable, they don't biodegrade, so you have to just replace them. There are... So anyway, the point was that there's been this shift in conversation from pollution, which is a very real and big problem, mostly perpetuated by these big corporate entities and governments. And then there's been this shift to, well, carbon is the problem. And you, the individual, produces all of that by driving your car and having a refrigerator and, all these modern conveniences are destroying the planet, and it's your fault, despite the fact that you are a very small portion of the pollution, and that carbon, which is what plants eat, is not nearly so dangerous as it's like being completely demonized. Furthermore, we're made out of carbon. So where does that logically go to?
Right.
Well, maybe there should be less. Maybe there should be less humans, right? And that's where it seems like.
And there is a helicopter producing carbon, right?
Yeah.
Keep going. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Then the last point is like all these people that are preaching that we humans are the problem. It's funny that they tend to be the ones flying in private jets to have these discussions where they are making decisions at a supranational level over billions of people's lives, often telling poorer countries that they can't have the things that the richer countries have come to enjoy, and just demonizing all the wrong things. And so it, because that doesn't logically track, the only conclusion that you can come to is that there is a reason that it is beneficial to them to do what is not logically consistent. And so they must have an agenda.
You are also vegan, which is also a way to reduce your impact on the earth, your impact on the world. Why did you become vegan? And it's also quite paradoxal with everything that we've talked about. And we rarely see someone who is so much into self-defense and guns and anarchy to be vegan. I haven't met many people with this profile.
I don't know very many people that carry weapons and refuse to eat animal products. I don't know.
Why is this paradox for you? Why did you choose to be vegan?
Yeah, so it's the same. I kind of came to this. I've kind of discovered all these things in the same way, which is through this process of, because the first thing that I learned that led me on this journey to all this other stuff was that I love to learn, that I really loved learning, and that I hated school, I hated schooling and forced education, but I loved learning, and I was just lucky, just something, in my late teens, I was able to just discover that there was a difference between the two. Because that seems like a paradox too, to hate school and love learning.
Right.
But it turns out that school is not about learning, it's about, it's like a one-way thing. It's like instructing you to be a certain kind of human, whereas learning is much more free form, and you can, figure everything out for yourself and who you are. It's a discovery process as opposed to something that's enforced upon you. And so what kicked off this whole thing was that I learned that I love to learn, and that was the single most important thing that happened to me, that led me on this whole journey. And as I started to understand the trivium, which is this process of taking input, processing and understanding it, and then outputting via action or words or whatever, as I started to understand that, things that I had previously done stopped making sense, right? So why is there a cat living in my house, but I'm eating a cow? And what? Why is the cat on a higher level than the cow? Why is it acceptable to eat this cow, and the cat can just live with me? I have no animosity with a cat. I really didn't have any animosity with the cow. What I discovered was that the only reason I was eating it is that I wanted to. I had this base desire in the very lowest parts of my brain to kill and eat other things. And I was realizing, yeah, that's the way we've done things for quite a while, but we don't have to do that anymore. There's no longer a survival condition that necessitates that we eat animals. And now I understand that that's not true for everybody, right? So I'm not going to go to some remote location and tell an indigenous people who live solely off of animal tracking, for example, that they have to put that down and they have to start trying to grow food in the desert that they live in, or in the Arctic or whatever. I'm not going to go impose myself on other people and tell them that they need to do, what I'm doing from the comfort of a place that can grow food abundantly. But in my life, it was no longer logically consistent to eat animals. And then that just sort of extended out to, well, why am I eating the things that they secrete? That also doesn't make sense. So
The things that what?
the things that animals secrete, so milk, for example, is something that is produced by a cow for baby cows. It's not produced for humans. Many of us, myself included, which I didn't know until around that time that I started to transition off, our digestive systems and our bodies it's not in harmony with drinking things that were made for other baby animals, right? So we naturally drink the milk of humans as infants, but only for a few years, or I don't even know how long. I don't have any kids to experience that, but it's for a short time, right, when we're infants. And then after that, we can eat solid foods, and those solid foods are everywhere growing out of the ground, and you don't even have to kill a plant to harvest of its fruit. And there's an idea that, I don't remember what culture it's from, but there's a culture where they will not eat the fruit of a plant until it's fallen from the plant. So until the plant discards this thing, then they won't eat it. Yeah, it does sound tough. But there are parts of the world that I've traveled to where this happens so often that the streets are a mess with food. And so if you walk by and you see a tree and you want some fruit from it, the occupant of the home where the tree stands will come out with a bag and offer you, take as much as you want, because otherwise it's going to fall to the ground and just make a mess. So food is abundant from plants, and so I just realized that there was no need to do this incredibly harmful thing. First and foremost, it requires stealing a life, which was no longer acceptable to me, and has not been in harmony with nature as I understand it. And then second of all, when you scale that up to what we have today with fast food restaurants and these, factory farming and things of that nature, that's even worse. It's on a massive scale. That's even worse. And even following the traditional research, we see that produces a lot of unwanted byproducts, right, into the environment. That is actually polluting as well. And then the land that's cleared for habitating these animals for grazing and things of that nature, deforestation in the Amazon, for example, these are all big problems. And so if we just stopped killing other animals, those problems just kind of disappear.
Don't you think that by eating local farmed animals that are enjoying their whole life and then come to the end of their life, and then we just kill them properly and without harming them as much, it's still stealing the life of the animal, but wouldn't be more respectful and acceptable for you? It's
certainly more in harmony with nature, right? You can't really argue that that's an objectively better situation on all counts, in comparison to what has become common in the Western world. The way that I think about it, when someone says, well, why don't you just, buy from a local farm that uses traditional practices and doesn't extend their bounds and is kind to the animal throughout its life and so on and so forth. For me, it's still, I think that's a good step if people want to take that first step. But for me, at the end of the day, that process still ends in the theft of a life. And so I didn't want to participate in that. But as you said, it's obviously better.
How long have you been vegan for?
I've started to forget already. See, if I had a computer, I could ask it.
Ah,
and it would tell me.
AI.
I think probably 7-8 years, maybe.
And how do you get your energy? Where do you get it from?
I feel like most of my energy comes from the sun because in the winter I have a lot less energy.
Yeah.
I feel like I always have more energy if I get sunshine, especially in the morning.
You take some sun bath?
Yeah, definitely.
You do?
Yeah, definitely. I look into the sun too. At an hour after sunrise and an hour before sunset, the UV index is 0, and so the risk from UV there isn't really a risk. And there's this notion of sun gazing, which is where you look directly into the sun, and it's not something I recommend that you just go and start doing. Like read about it and understand
it.
It
Must hurt your eyes.
and also start. Most people start by looking near the sun for very short periods of time. It might be 5 seconds.
How long do you do now?
It depends how much of the habit I'm into, but maybe 30 seconds to a couple minutes, depending on how often I've been doing it. And it's an interesting experience because it's like, you can't see it. It's because it's like this pure light. You can't really it's difficult to explain, but it's like, some people have called it like looking into the face of God, which is maybe a bit strong, but it is a kind of an experience. Like that's a way to describe that experience for sure. And then, I find that gives me energy.
It doesn't wreck your vision?
You're definitely going to see spots after you look away for a while. But as an interesting anecdote, I went recently to the ophthalmologist. I wear contacts, and I had the year before previously, he'd kind of scolded me for sleeping in my contacts, and he said that's.
You sleep with your contacts?
I had previously had a bad habit of occasionally sleeping in my contacts, and he said, that's really bad, and not only should you stop doing it, but the damage that you've done, I don't remember what it's called, but there's something sort of starts to creep across your eyes. I don't remember if it's like, I don't remember what it is, but anyway, there's some damage is done that if you continue doing it, or even if you stop doing it, will just exist forever because the damage has been done. And then if you continue to do it, obviously it'll get worse and worse, and eventually they have to do surgery, and you'll have serious vision problems. And I said, okay, no problem. I will stop sleeping in my contacts, and I did. I was also, I look into the sun every now and then, and I wasn't going to mention this to him, but because I thought he might have probably an adverse reaction. But I went back recently after a year, and he's looking, and he goes, well, it's not really supposed to happen, but all that stuff has regressed, and it's pulled back.
Interesting.
And I said, well, what do you mean that's not supposed to happen? That's a good thing, right? He said, yeah, well, it's better. Yeah, all that stuff that I told you wasn't going to go away is mostly gone away, to the point where he said he didn't even know if he should write down that it was still there. And I can't attribute those two things, but I also can't tell that I've done anything else healthy for my eyes, because I spend a ton of time on a screen every day. I am indoors, subjected to indoor light a lot. That's the only thing I can think of, besides maybe my diet, that might be good for the health of my eyes. So
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I think there are health benefits too to the way I eat, because, so for example, I went and had blood drawn not too long ago, and the phlebotomist that was taking the blood, I was looking, and I hadn't had blood taken since I was probably a kid, and I remembered that blood was like a very dark color. I don't have a red to point out, but like a very deep, like maroon type color was how I generally think of blood, and if you get like a little cut, that's usually what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And she was pulling it out, and it was like a super bright red, like almost radiant. And and she said, "Are you a vegetarian?" And I said, "Yeah." "How did you know that?" And she said, "Vegetarians always have the healthy, this really healthy color." And
She considered that color
so she
healthier?
she did. I didn't. This was unprompted, and she just knew that I was vegetarian by that color.
Wow.
So I thought that was interesting. These are just like anecdotal things. Obviously, this isn't evidence that I'm like stating as objective fact, but my experience is that I feel much better. I have more energy. The modicum of test results that I have from doctors are all positive in comparison to my previous lifestyle.
Is it difficult to find food like in your daily life, or
You
grow your own food?
Yeah,
Is it a big
not
part
very
of
well.
your...
Not very
No.
well. I'm trying to get better at gardening, but mostly I'm getting most of my food from the store still. The other thing I wanted to mention was I think there's an energetic aspect as far as like consuming something that has been killed, especially if it's lived a tortured life and then was killed early in life in a horrible way a lot of times. I think that it's going to stay right in that animal's flesh, and then when you consume that's going to travel with that animal, obviously to a lesser degree if it had a long life and was out in a pasture its whole life and generally didn't know what was going to happen to it until it happened. That's going to be a little better, but I think that not ingesting that, like I'm alive, so I want to ingest things that are alive, basically, so like even all these, there's a big uproar in like the freedom communities around like the quote unquote plant-based food that's made, highly processed, often made to imitate animal products,
Right.
which I think is like, it's such a shortcut, right? It's like also not in line with nature, right? It's this sort of synthetic way of doing things because we got comfortable with this kind of food, and so we want to eat that kind of food, but it's all ego. It's all like this lower brain stuff where we just like have desires, and rather than doing the harder thing and finding out that when you acclimatize yourself or acclimate yourself to the more difficult thing, that the benefits are way greater than eating the comfort food or doing the easy action that's less in harmony.
Yeah, this is part of the no concession that you make.
I guess, and it does. I run into, like I said, like gray areas and places where it's very difficult or impractical, and it's definitely not the easy path. It could be if it was more popular, but currently it's not.
Yeah.
When I'm eating at home, it's pretty easy. If I go out, I'm lucky to have friends that we kind of all have different dietary restrictions, and there's like certain places that we all agree on, and so that makes it kind of easier. But if I was just to go out with a random group of folks, it would be very high odds that there would be very few choices,
right,
for me.
Yeah.
In which case,
like a bag of chips.
Yeah, and it's typically something that's unhealthy as well, right?
Yeah.
So, but I'll just do that and want something more when I get home or
On the
whatever.
way back,
It's not that big of an inconvenience. Like everything is abundant, especially in the modern world with the technology we have, and so it just seems like an excuse to be like, oh well, I'm here, I might as well have a cheeseburger because everyone else is. It just seems like a cop-out.
Yeah. That's interesting. That almost makes me want to go back to at least vegetarianism, because I had to go back to eating meat because I felt so low energy, but I also didn't exercise much and I was kind of stuck, and I feel like being in the movement is also how you can get your energy.
Exercise is definitely
and
another
that's
one.
not that easy, so I chose the easy route of eating meat again, but that would have been probably more beneficial to just exercise instead of going back to meat to find my energy level back. But it inspires me to go maybe back to vegetarianism, at least. Veganism, I don't know, but I think it's time to wrap up. But before we do, I would like to hear who are your inspirations? 3 people or 3 things that are big inspiration for you and that inspire your lifestyle, inspire your blueprint of life.
3 people?
3 people, and also that would be great if that could be people I could interview.
Oh, okay. That'll
if
be
it's
more
not-
difficult.
It's okay, maybe I could try.
I'll give you first Mark Passio, who is a natural law teacher. He was the one that first. So I had been learning all these things, from my late teens all the way up until, into my 30s a little bit, and I had all these concepts, and I knew I believed in all these things, but I didn't have the framework of natural law. And when I heard some of his content and I started to go run through his podcasts and his natural law seminar, it was like, oh, all these things that I had were pieces of this greater picture, this big picture that I was kind of zoomed in on the pieces, and I didn't understand the bigger picture. And it just all fell into place, like perfectly, like anarchy and veganism and self-defense and
He's into
karmic law.
veganism too?
All of it, yeah.
Oh,
He is
wow.
the like I said, he put all this stuff together for me, and so he would be definitely one of the biggest influences, because all the other stuff I kind of was learning these individual parts, and I could name you, a dozen influences from each particular topic, but he was the one that brought all those topics together, and that helped me to form the framework that I live by today. So he would be the first one for sure.
Okay.
Let me try and think if I can get one. If there's anyone more local. I could give also a historical figure, which would be Nikola Tesla. And I think that he was a big influence, because Nikola Tesla was a big influence, I think, because he very much was like, he was like the very purest notion of a scientist that was like discovering all these things on his own, and wasn't really he had all these opportunities, and he was often funded by these gigantic corporations and these oligarchs like JP Morgan and Westinghouse and stuff. And he was like, unfortunately, during his life, he was like unable to complete a lot of his projects because he was attempting to use the funding from these guys and not realizing that they maybe had an alternative motive to what he had, whereas he had a very pure motive of discovery and understanding, and he just came up with so many inventions and discoveries that built the modern world that we live on today. So I would have to list him as an influence as well, and just being like, just the way he thinks is very different.
Oh yeah?
I would highly recommend reading anything that he wrote. Not, reading about him is great, but if you read the things that he wrote, there's some very short books that he wrote. I don't know if they were meant to be books or if they were just writings or whatever, but there are some collections of his writings that are really good. I just like the way he thinks. And then the third one, it's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think the other one would be my family, even though my framework for life is very different, and was even more so very different as I was coming up, and as I was rebelling against a lot of the things that I was taught. I also was taught a lot of things that stuck with me. Like I was saying earlier, we teach kids, you don't just hit somebody, those kind of things.
Values?
Yeah, I was fortunate to be instilled with some values that they kind of were similar to the way that I think today, just delivered in a different way, and from someone with a different perspective. And I, at the time, wouldn't have appreciated that, and now I do appreciate that. My sister especially was a big influence, because she was, someone that I was very close to, that I could have an adult conversation with when everyone else was treating me like a kid. So yeah.
Thank you, David. That was super interesting. We dived into a lot of topics, and that gave me some new ideas, and I really enjoyed those conversations. And yeah, I hope that will inspire also some people that are watching. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, David, again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.